On the 1st of December 1948, the body of a man was found on a beach in Adelaide, Australia. He had no identification and no fingerprint records. In a secret pocket in the man's trousers, they found a small piece of paper with a cryptic message that started a mystery. It happened like this. Somerton Park is a suburb of the southern city of Adelaide in Australia. It is situated beside the seaside and has a history of helping and treating children with illness and disabilities in its residential care properties. At about 6:30 a.m, near one of these care homes on the morning of December 1st, 1948, a body of a man was found lying in the sand on the beach. He was lying with his back to the seawall and his legs extended and feet crossed. On initial investigation, it was believed that the man had died while sleeping. His possessions were mixed and more confusing than helpful. They included cigarettes, an unused rail and bus ticket, a comb and matches. He carried no official identification. Over the coming weeks, months and years, witnesses came forward with details about the evening before he was found. A couple saw the man extend his arm and drop it limply. Another witness claimed to have seen a man looking down over the body from above. And in 1959, another witness, along with others, came forward to say that they had seen a well-dressed man carrying the now deceased man over his shoulder on the beach. Most of the witnesses, however, had dismissed the man as being a drunk or simply sleeping, so didn't alert the authorities. When the pathologist examined the body, he was also left with unanswered questions. The man appeared to have a British look about him. He was of average height, grey eyes and fair hair. He estimated his age at about 40 to 45. Nothing immediately stood out as peculiar except for the man's feet, which showed signs of somebody who danced or performed ballet. He was dressed in American-style fashion, and well dressed at that. His hands showed no signs of manual labour. He didn't wear a hat, it seemed, which was unusual for the time period. But more importantly, all the labels on his clothes had been removed. He was clean shaven and his dental records didn't show up anything, so police assumed it was a suicide. But why and how? Unfortunately, this couldn't be proven. The man's last meal had been a pasty a few hours before his death, but they couldn't find any foreign substances in his body. The pathologist was convinced it was some kind of poisoning, but couldn't prove this or reveal the man's identity. The man did have an unusually large spleen, about 3 times that of a normal person, but if the man was poisoned, it didn't seem to come from the food he ate. They also couldn't really verify if the man was the same seen the evening before, because the witness had not seen a face. It was a mystery. A few days after the man was discovered, an inquest began, and the pathologist would re-examine the body. It was during this inquest that the most bizarre piece of evidence appeared. A tiny piece of paper that had been rolled up and hidden into a sewn-up pocket in the dead man's trousers was found. The paper contained only the words "Tamam Shud." Staff at the public library translated this to mean ended or finished. It appeared the words had been torn from the last page of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a poetry book translated from 10th and 11th century Persia. Australian police then conducted a nationwide search to find the book, including a picture of the torn out scrap of paper containing the ominous words. They hoped the book's discovery would give them some answers as to the identity of the Somerton man. Reports on when the book was actually found vary, but a couple of weeks later, most accounts state that the book was found in an unlocked car parked in Jetty Road, Glenelg, either in the rear floor well or on the back seat, the town near Somerton Beach. After some tests were conducted, the scrap of paper was proven to be from that book. Bizarrely, the book also contained a cryptic code in the back of its pages. 5 lines of text in capital letters were found, with the second line struck out. It appeared to be some kind of cryptic message, but nobody could decode what it meant. There were many theories thrown around by the public. Initially, it was assumed that the letters were just in a foreign language, but soon after, when the police realised it was a code, they called in the experts. Unfortunately, all attempts to decode the message proved unsuccessful. And just before the book was found, about 2 weeks after the body was found, the next piece of the puzzle showed up at the railway station in Adelaide. A brown suitcase, with its label removed, had been checked into the station cloakroom the morning of the 30th of November. The suitcase contained clothes like pyjamas and slippers, and also some tools which would have been used for stenciling words onto cargo ships. In the case there were also a pair of trousers with traces of sand in the cuff. Though the labels had been removed, the police did find some labels with the name Keane on them. Police believed that whoever removed the clothing tags either overlooked these items or purposely left the Keane tags on the clothes, knowing Keane was not the dead man's name. Rationing was still in place from the recent war, so it would be common practice to remove labels from second-hand clothing. That being said, there were strange things about the clothes. There were no spare socks, and the stitching on the coat was likely American-made. The clothes were not imported, so either the man had lived in America or bought it from someone who had. Checking train records, it was assumed the man had travelled to Adelaide from Melbourne or Sydney on the overnight train before catching a bus to the town near Somerton Beach. The man had purchased a ticket for Henley Beach, another beach further up the coast, but for whatever reason never boarded it. So why had the man come to Somerton? Well as the code in the back of the book, there was also something else. A telephone number. It belonged to a woman named Jessica Thompson, born Jessica Harkness, who lived 400 metres from where the body was found. When police questioned the woman, she said she did not know the man or why he had her phone number, but she also stated that some unidentified man had tried to visit her and asked a next-door neighbour about her a few months earlier. In later years and interviews, journalists and even her own daughter admitted that it was probable Jessica did know the man, although Jessica herself never admitted it. She had requested with police to keep her name out of public record, which they agreed to, so she remained anonymous, and her family never really knew of her involvement in the case. Police made a plaster cast of the man's head and shoulders in the hope that in future somebody may have been able to identify him. When Jessica was shown the cast, it is reported that she was completely taken aback and almost fainted. She immediately looked away and couldn't look at it again. Jessica had worked in a hospital in Sydney during World War II, and she had owned a copy of Rubaiyat. In 1945, she had given the book to an army lieutenant named Alf Boxall. It seemed they had had a relationship together, but after the war, Jessica moved to Adelaide and married. Alf wrote to her, but she told him she was married and they had no further communication. Because of this, police assumed Boxall was the dead man, but it wasn't to be. In 1949, they tracked him down in Sydney, and he still had the book. He now worked as a maintenance man at a bus depot, and apparently had no link whatsoever to the dead man. The last page and the words Tamam Shud were still in place in the book. In the front of the book, Jessica had signed it and written out a verse. Indeed, indeed, repentance oft before, I swore, but was I sober when I swore? And then came spring, and rose in hand, my threadbare penitence a pieces tore. From here the trail started to run cold, but multiple theories and possible identifications popped up over the years. In fact, just days after the man was discovered, the Advertiser newspaper identified an E.C. Johnson as the man, until he turned up to a police station in person to stop the rumours. By February 1949, police had dealt with 8 different positive identifications from the public, all proving to be incorrect. This included a woodcutter, a station worker, a steamship worker, and a Swedish man. By 1953, that number rose to 251, but the police claimed the only clue of any value still was the clothing the man had worn on his discovery. The mystery of the case and its interest in the media and the public meant it inevitably got linked to other cases. In the summer of 1949, the body of a 2-year-old boy named Clive Magnusson was found in a sack about 20 kilometres up the coast from Somerton Beach. Lying next to the body, unconscious, was his father, Keith. The wife of the man, Roma Magnusson, later stated that after the death, a man had almost ran her down outside her home and threatened to kill her, telling her to keep away from the police, or else. A similar man had been seen lurking around the house on another occasion. Roma believed that the death was linked to her husband's involvement in the Somerton case. Her husband Keith had worked with a man named Carl Thompson in 1938, and Keith believed that he was the Somerton man. She believed his attempts to identify this man were the cause of the threats and death. The mayor and other prominent local figures received threatening calls from an anonymous source around the same time, stating that they would have an accident if they stuck their nose into the Magnusson affair. Police, however, believed these calls to be a hoax. It is unclear then what really happened with the Magnusson family, but the links to the Somerton man don't seem to hold much weight. Outside of Australia, the case also gathered attention, and the police worked with both the FBI in America and Scotland Yard in the UK to try find the man's identity. Fingerprints and a photo of the man yielded no results. Who was this man? The body was buried in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery in 1949. The Salvation Army conducted the service, and it was paid for by the South Australian Grandstand Bookmakers Association. Years later, long since the burial, flowers began appearing at the grave. Police questioned a woman leaving the cemetery, but she claimed to know nothing of the man. Around the same time, a receptionist at a hotel in Adelaide, opposite the railway station, came forward to say a strange man had stayed there for a few days in 1948, checking out on November 30th. The man carried a briefcase, not unlike something a doctor would carry. An employee had looked inside this case and saw what looked like a needle. In 1959, a New Zealand prisoner came forward claiming to know the man, and in 1978, a documentary series called Inside Story tried to solve the case, interviewing Boxall and Paul Lawson, the man who made the cast of the head and shoulders. All this time had passed, and people still wanted to solve the mystery, but it looked like a dead end. As time has gone on, it seemed harder than ever to solve the case. The police still hold a cast of the man, but much of the DNA has been destroyed due to the use of formaldehyde in the embalming. The brown suitcase was destroyed in the 80s, and witness reports have gone missing over the years. In 1994, the chairman of the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine reviewed the case and believed it to have been a poisoning. This seems in line with what the original pathologist determined years earlier. The swollen organs and lack of natural disease seem to indicate this more than anything else. All of this mystery inevitably led to the theory that the man was in fact a spy. The time period that he died and the circumstances of his demise do lend themselves well to this idea. There are also at least 2 sites relatively close to Somerton that would have interested would-be spies: the Radium Hill uranium mine and the Woomera test range, an Australian military research facility. Around the time of the man's death, Australia was also reorganising its security forces and set up the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation. This was in conjunction with a crackdown on Soviet espionage in the country after the war. Boxall also shows up again in this theory, as it is believed he did some intelligence work during and immediately after the war. In the 1978 documentary, when asked about this during an interview, and if he was involved in espionage, Boxall replied, "It's quite a melodramatic thesis, isn't it?" In 2009, a university team, led by Professor Derek Abbott, began looking into the case in an attempt to solve it. While examining images of the body, they found that the Somerton man's upper ear hollow was larger than the lower one, a trait found in only 1 to 2% of the Caucasian population. He also had a genetic disorder on his incisor teeth that only 2% of the population also shared. The team then looked at a picture of Jessica's eldest son Robin and realised he shared these unusual traits too. DNA analysis couldn't prove a link between them, but the similarities seemed undeniable. Finally, after years of work in 2022, the team, along with a genealogist, announced that they had found the identity of the Somerton man. They believed he was Carl Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker born in November 1905 in a suburb of Melbourne. Carl's parents had emigrated from Germany and opened a bakery. The marriage was not a happy one, and according to reports, this was mainly because of Carl. He was introverted and solitary, but also stubborn and violent. Carl's father was also physically and verbally abusive. Eventually, Carl's mother left, and the family all went their separate ways. Carl and his eldest sister Frida continued to live close by to each other, and Frida's husband was named Keen. He had spent some time in America, which would go some way as to explaining Carl's clothes when he was found. The team believed Carl spiraled down with mental health after losing several close relatives in a few short years. They believed he died by suicide from poisoning. And so far, that seems to be the closest we have gotten to revealing the mystery of the Somerton man. It seems like the rapid pace of advancing technology is helping to solve many of these cases. Maybe in years to come, DNA and genetic technology will be so good that we can solve almost any case once we have the right biological material. This case in particular spans over 70 years, and parts of the story remain unsolved today. Was there some spy involvement in the case? Was there a link to the Magnuson family tragedy? And what really happened between Carl and Jessica? DNA can tell us who the man is, but much of what happened that day and the lives of the people involved seem lost forever. Sometimes I enjoy sitting in a cafe and watching the world outside go by. People watching, as they call it. It is stories like this that remind me that we are all threads in a vast web, and that each thread has its own ups and downs, relationships and personal tragedies. We are often so consumed with our own lives that we dismiss the unusual or strange for fear of being ostracized ourselves. Many of the witnesses to the Somerton man thought he was just a drunk or a homeless man. Many thought he was just sleeping. I probably would have thought the same if I had seen the man myself. We could not know a figure spotted on a local beach could spark a 70-year mystery. And we can't say what we would have done in that situation. We can only hope we don't find ourselves in similar circumstances.